So today is a Buddhist doozy, the Impermanence and Death. So she's got a look of knowing on her face. So sometimes people think Buddhists are morbid because they talk about impermanence and death. Like even my mother's like, why are you so obsessed with, impermanence and death? And but actually it's to live your life fully, because if you haven't examined your own life and made friends with your own mortality, you're probably not motivated to put in the really important meaningful things and to seek meaning, because finally realizing you really will die, which usually doesn't hit most of us until middle age unless you have some kind of illness, is such a life-changing thing, to realize you really are. And it's one thing to think, I'm going to die. And it's another thing to be like, yeah, you're going to die. You got 6 months. Or you're like, ah! But it's an important thing we have to face. And something I think we fear it and we view it as a failure. That's why we hide from it, because our society is based on, consumption and being successful and building up, accumulating to this pinnacle of success. And that's supposed to be happiness, like the house and the kids and the picket fence and, the good job. And I think we're probably a little bit spiritually rudderless, since most of us abandoned the traditional religion and also the, so-called family values of previous generations, and that sense of community and identity. And we replaced it with this idea that materialism could solve all our problems. But, there's been a kind of underlying depression and sense of meaninglessness in our society, because we've realized that even if all your material problems are solved, you still have the existential problem of being alive, of what's the meaning of it all and how can I be happy. And I guess in a way in postmodern society that means you have to determine your own sense of meaning and find your own tribe or whatever, but that's really hard when everybody is there are some not so bad things about a good economy and so forth, but the bad thing is under capitalism we have this sense that we're struggling alone, whereas maybe in a more traditional society you have a sense that someone's got your back, and that's why we place so much emphasis on the nuclear family and the partner, and it's really too much emphasis on one person to fulfill all our needs, which is why it's so devastating when relationships break up or people grow apart. And I really think we have to change this. We have to put our eggs in more than one basket and invest in community, invest in friendships, invest in solidarity, and it doesn't have to be that person is perfect or that, you have different friends for different things, and to embrace the people who are sidelined by society. Maybe they're neurodivergent and they're just not very good at kind of saying the right thing, but their heart's in the right place, or their brain works differently, or they come from a different era. So it's just so important to be a little more flexible in how we embrace community. I mean, of course, it's okay to set a boundary if someone is abusive and, not good for you. But it's also a good thing to not be so elitist, in the sense that we only, I guess so many of us are so time poor as well. That's why we tend to only, have our partner and our kids and a few good close friends. but it's creating an epidemic of loneliness, I think. So, impermanence and death is meant to give you a sense of joy in a way, because you're alive today. Today is a gift, and you have the potential to become a Buddha, and at least to find peace, if you don't want to set your stakes so high, to become less effed up, and to maybe be a refuge for yourselves and others, So another way of looking at death, which comes from the Zen tradition and from Thich Nhat Hanh's tradition, is no coming, no going, no death, no fear. And I was saying last week how Buddhists view time as a circle, and Hindus more whereas the Brahmanical religions view time as a line, beginning, end, alpha and omega. And if you have like your non-self elements, your parents, the people who grow your food, the people who give you education, your shelter, your clothes, the people who make those things, and so on and so forth, into an infinity. And those people have non-self elements. It's like an infinite web that divides and divides and divides into infinity. And you can't find the beginning or the end. So really, we're just in a cycle, and like, for example, if I take this paper and I burn this paper will not disappear. It doesn't just go into nothing. This paper goes into gas and smoke, and then it might go up into the sky and join with hydrogen and come down as rain. So the way Thich Nhat Hanh describes death is that you don't disappear, you just change your face. You go back into the elements. You continue in your children, in the people who've spoken to you, in your words, in your deeds. And in a way, everything we have is because of previous generations. Our ancestors stand behind us. From the first person who helped another human being with their femur, to the people who started verbal communication, to the fathers that protected women while they were pregnant, and the women that birthed those generations, and the cooperative relationship between people, and the grandmothers who collected herbs while other younger women were busy caring for children. Everybody played a role in the survival, in this continuation. Tai talks about how his existence was dependent upon his ancestors, and how when he looked in the mirror, he saw his mother and his father and previous generations. And that, that circle of life continuing on. And he wrote a poem. He said, "This body is not me. I am not caught by this body. I am life without boundaries. I have never been born, and I will never die. Over the wide ocean and the sky, and so many galaxies and stars, it all manifests from the basis of consciousness. Since beginningless time, I have always been free. Birth and death are only a door through which we go in and out. Birth and death are only a game of hide and seek. So smile to me and take my hand and wave goodbye. Tomorrow we shall meet again, or even before. We shall always meet again on the myriad paths of life." And another excerpt is, "Do not say I'll depart tomorrow, because even today I am still arriving. Looking deeply, I arrive in every second. To be a bud on a spring branch. My joy is like spring, so warm it makes the flowers bloom in all the walks of life. My pain is like a river of tears, so full it fills the four oceans. Please call me by my true names, so I can wake up, and so the door of my heart can be left open, the door of compassion." So if you think that you have many non-self elements, you are empty of a permanent, unchanging self. And when you die, you go into the elements, you change form. or from a more traditional point of view, you know, your mental stream continues on to another birth. So because you're empty of a permanent, unchanging self, there is no death and no birth. Nothing, because no inherent being has been born, only a collection of mental formations, karmic seeds, that is continuing on from another life, yeah? So, but you have to just be careful of falling into this view of extremism, which is not the extreme of existence, which is what most religions have, which is this idea of a soul that reincarnates or a person who goes to heaven. But because you're empty of a permanent, unchanging self, you're either you're beyond existing and not existing. You're in a constant, you are interdependent. You both exist on a relative level. Like there is a you, there is a person who experiences, like if I slap you today, probably I'll experience the results. There's a person there who will be slapped back. So, but at the same time, that person is empty of a permanent, unchanging self. So no birth, no death. On a relative level, you exist. On an ultimate level, it's like a puzzle. A puzzle is the best way, actually, of the pieces are all there, you know, and death is like just throwing the puzzle board up in the air and all the pieces fall down in a different pattern, but probably a little more organized. Or, you know, like those old-fashioned lotto balls things, and or you throw all the numbers in and you turn the wheel. Yes, yes, yes. So that's like rebirth. But you wouldn't look at that and say, you know, that's a person. You would that's a truly existent, you know, unchanging being. And someone once said to the Buddha, you know, how can a good deed become something so big, you know? Like, I don't believe my wife donating food to you every day is going to make her a Buddha. You know, that's a scam by you. And the Buddha was like, and he was really angry, you know, he's like, you're cheating people by telling them, you know, if they offer a meal, they'll get enlightened, you know? And his wife was so happy and inspired. And he's like, that guy's a fraud. And he came to the Buddha and he said, you know, you're a fraud and you're defrauding my wife. And the Buddha was very calm. And when the man had stopped his rant, he said, do you have a tree in your front yard? And in India, you know, they have these big fig trees and banyan trees that grow really big. And often they grow in the most inhospitable places, like the crack in the pavement or, you know, the guttering of an old rusted house. And the man said, yes, I do have a very large tree in my front yard. And the Buddha said, well, you know, when that tree first started growing, how big was it? And he said, you know, it was tiny. You know, my father planted it. It was tiny. And the Buddha said, well, my friend, you know, if a seed can become a tree that is so big and offer a shade to all beings, can't a good deed done with devotion become the cause for awakening over a period of time? Deeds, like the results of deeds, like the shadow that follows the body. And the man was like, oh, okay, I get it. Could be possible. Could be possible. But I think, you know, preparing ourselves for death makes us, one, not be lazy about practice. Because I have all these people always saying to me, I can't come, I have to do this, I have to do that. And it's like, wow, you know, where are your priorities? You know, where are your priorities? Like, the one thing that is certain, death, is the thing we don't prepare for, you know, and this predicament we're in, where we're suffering, we have an uncontrolled emotions and you know, and then we, you know, when people go through something bad, they always come back to the temple. Like, this thing happens with young people in Buddhist centers. They come to the center and they're really committed, very idealistic. Then usually they'll meet someone, sometimes at the Buddhist center, and they'll fall in love and they'll have kids and they'll disappear into the vortex of family for a few years, which is nothing wrong with that. But, you know, they don't make time to come to the temple. You know, they might make time to watch like 3 hours of TV a night, but, you know, and then they'll appear a decade later at the center again, and they're divorced, and they're suffering, you know, and they're really committed to Dharma again because they're suffering, you know. And then they'll stay and they'll be at every sit for a few years, and then, you know, maybe they'll meet their second or third husband or wife and they'll disappear again, you know, when they're happy. And then they'll come back. So I don't know. You know, if life is a jar and you have big rocks to put in the most important things first, Dharma should be one of those things, in my opinion. So, you know, Tibetan lamas used to really bash people on the head with death and impermanence, you know, like this body will become a corpse, and pretty intense, morbid stuff. But Tibetans were really rugged, stubborn people. So that's why they tried to put the fear of Buddha in them, so to speak. But Westerners tend to be a little bit more sensitive. And if you tell them those kind of things, you know, this body will become a corpse, you know, they're like, oh my God, I'm never going back there again. But yeah, it is really scary, actually, when you come up against death, especially if you've lost a child or if you get a terminal diagnosis. And yeah, and it does happen, you know. About 35 to 40% of us will be diagnosed with cancer. Some of us will survive. But a lot of those will be people below 55. So don't assume you have a long life to practice Dharma, you know, and make time. It's funny how we always find time for everything but meditation, everything but Dharma. It's almost like we fear the demise of the ego, you know, and the ego has everything rigged up for its comfort. Yeah. So the Tibetan teachings say human life is like a mountain waterfall, or like a prisoner being led to the place of execution, or like a fish caught in a fisherman's net, or animals playing in the pens of the slaughterhouse. So yeah, there's that brick on the head thing again. Yeah, but it is real, and if you prepare for it, it doesn't necessarily have to be scary. I've seen, and it's this, I think there's also a lot of fear around birth, you know, that it's the power is taken out of the hands of the women, and, you know, it's all very clinical, and there's a great deal of fear and mystery, and it's not well understood. Whereas in the days where women would just give birth in front of their friends, and, you know, someone who's sick would be nursed at home as they died, it's a very natural part of the cycle of life, and it's not foreign or scary, you know. For me, it was a very instrumental experience. For me to seek the spiritual path was the death of my father, and my mother had nursed him at home as he died of cancer over 15 years. And it really made me think, what is the meaning of life? And I left home at 15 for that reason, in search of that. So all the things we accumulate, basically, if you contemplate death and impermanence, it's to make you live the rest of your life fully. It's not to make you depressed. And, you know, you can be, like, I've seen people who think about death and impermanence maybe too much, and they stop surfing, or they become a little bit too extreme in their practice. But there's probably a lot of people who should think about it more, you know, and would actually turn up when they're in that marriage family vortex that I call it. Yeah. So yeah, death is certain. These are the 3 points. Death is certain. The time of death is uncertain. And at the time of death, only spiritual practice and merit, good karma helps. So, you know, death is certain. Kind of, we know that, but we think it's off, or we always tell ourselves off in the future, you know. But you just have to see a road accident or floods, or anything can happen, fire. You know, there's so many causes of death when you least expect it. And it's funny, because I have a condition that will eventually kill me earlier than most people, and all my friends were like really freaked out, and, oh, you're gonna die, and, oh, you know, being extra nice and whatever. And I'm like, you could still die before me. Like, you just don't know. You just don't know when it's going to happen. So we hide from death. Like in India, they put photos of dead bodies in the newspaper, which kind of freaked me out when I first saw it. But we don't do that here. Like, we never see a corpse. We're freaked out. And even when we do see a corpse, they've been filled with weird chemicals. And like, my grandmother looked better dead than she ever did alive. It was so weird. They put makeup and like, they really fill the body with some kind of gel, and it's crazy. And it was so unnerving. She looked like a mannequin. Yeah, but we just don't know. We just don't know. So we really have to live every moment with full awareness and with joy, and to not hold on to things that are, a grudge, because it makes us suffer. And to make good karma, to be generous and cultivate wisdom. Because the time of death is uncertain. Death is certain. The time of death is uncertain. One of the sub-points of that is there's nobody who ever lived that didn't die. All these famous people, Elvis, Marilyn Monroe, the Kennedys, And it's so funny because it seems like the more rich and famous someone is, the more miserable they end up and, dying alone, drug addicted, like Whitney Houston and George Michael and Prince and, so many people dying in their 50s, Yeah. So power, wealth, beauty, friends, possessions, family, these are the things we spend our lives accumulating. We think it's so important, running around like a headless chook. And yeah, survival matters, we all need to pay the rent and buy food and whatever, save a bit for our old age. But at the end of the day, all the things you've been working for, you'll have to let go of. All these endless projects, you will have to let go of. You can't take them with you. Even your loved one, even your children, they can't help you at the time of death. And even for the sake of love and passion, we often commit non-virtuous actions, So it's kind of interesting the Tibetans have quite a specific take on death that other traditions don't actually have. So Tibetans have this text called the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And they believe that when you die, your elements dissolve into each other one by one. First, the element of earth dissolves into water, and the person will often grab hold of your hand and say, I'm sinking, And then the water and, whatever is in the body will be evacuated. And water dissolves into fire. And the warmth withdraws into their heart, and they'll probably sweat and expend a bit of heat. I noticed this is exactly how it was with my father. And, if they die suddenly, it just happens quicker. That's all. And then as the fire dissolves into the air, they have this death rattle. And then their mind becomes very subtle as it leaves the body. So then there's like clinical death. And then they say that the air dissolves into the space element. And this person, their consciousness becomes very refined. But at the same time, they have a chance to merge with the clear light, which is like our innate. In those moments, people often talk about this moment they had where maybe they saw God or whatever, in Buddhism we say it's the clear light dawning, this awakened potential we all have. You can merge with that at the time of death because your mind is more subtle. But what usually happens is people react with fear and ego again and start clinging to themselves and all they've lost. And they then see fearful projections driven by karma. And so then eventually, like for the first few days, they're probably floating around, seeing what their family and friends are saying. And that's why we say when someone dies, make it as quiet as possible. Don't cry loudly, just be peaceful. You can cry, but not like violently. And keep the environment around the body very good, very peaceful, and say good things about the dead person. And if you have to move the body, like they say 3 days is good to not move the body, which is very hard in Australia. But if you have to move the body, touch the top of the head first, and then gradually, and they can read the minds of people, they say. And then, you know, if people are like fighting over their possessions or something, they'll get disturbed by that. And then eventually over time, they usually say that there's 49 days between this life and the next, but it could vary. And they say that the different realms of existence appear to the person. You know, it doesn't matter if you don't believe this or not, but this is what, you know, Tibetans say. The 6 realms of existence appear, and along with that appears a Buddha to lead them to another more awakened state. So the 5 Dhyani Buddhas, who represent the elements and the 5 negative emotions transformed into the 5 wisdoms, appear, as well as the option to go to one of these realms, like hell, which is temporary, animal realm, hungry ghost realm, human realm, kind of being of light, you could say, like a temporary God realm. Not God in the capital G Christian sense, but you're born and you live a couple of thousand years and you have a really nice life. And then you die because your karma's run out. But usually we're driven by karma towards one of these, and we feel afraid of this luminous kind of ground of awareness with nothing to hold on to. And we're usually propelled by, you know, craving and self-grasping to take rebirth in one of these realms. And the Tibetan Book of the Dead is kind of like the traveler's guide to the afterlife, you know, and they'll read these prayers every few days, and they'll urge them to take rebirth in like the blue light of the human beings, or to recognize the nature of mind. But if you have no practice of recognizing the nature of mind in life, it's hard to do it at death. But, you know, Buddhists view death as a very sacred, you know, crucial time to find a good rebirth. And that's why, like, when a person dies, they'll do good deeds on their behalf and donate their, you know, possessions to the monastery. And, you know, the family will do practice and say, you know, rituals and to make good karma, because the dead person sees them doing it and rejoices, and that's how the merit is transferred. So basically, you know, a person who is prepared is less afraid at the time of death. And that's why, you know, in the Theravada tradition, monks and nuns say every day, I am of the nature to die, and I will experience the results of my actions. I am heir to my actions, and all that is dear to me, you know, I will lose. And not because they're like masochists, but just because they're trying to make the most of every moment, you know. And if you live with mindfulness, if you follow your breath when you're preparing your meal, and when you're eating your meal, and when you're talking to friends, like if you carry that mindfulness through the day, you live in a fearless way, and you don't do things you'll regret, you know, and your life becomes meaningful. So, but it is true that only spiritual practice is of use when we're dying. I mean, of course, yeah, if you have money and you can be saved and you get good medical treatment, that's great, but even rich people die, you know. So in the end, we go into the ground equal. We come out naked and equal, and we die naked and equal, you know. So it's good to remember sometimes that everything we're working on, all these endless projects, everything we think is so important, so crucial, we have to leave behind. And what is this thing, this really fundamental thing in life we don't prepare for? Death, that we're not, even thinking about. Our own wisdom, our own peace, our own good karma. It usually takes some kind of massive collision to make us think about these things. And even if you don't believe in future lives, like doing good actions makes you feel happy in this life. Makes you, if you're doing bad things, you always feel guilty and stressed out, and anxious, fearful, guilty. So it just makes sense to leave it with non-violence and cultivate wisdom and live with kindness and understanding as much as possible. I mean, even if you think, Putin is a terrible person, but if you think Putin is 70% water, it's very different, Yeah, and they say that if you're someone who doesn't think about death and impermanence, doesn't prioritize practice, doesn't have compassion, you're just someone, like from a Tibetan point of view, Dharma practitioners wore red. You're just someone wearing red. If you have like all these Buddhist accoutrements, you have the rosary and you have some kind of Buddhist clothes and you have a monk's bag and, the name Buddhist. But if you don't think about these things and you don't actually practice, you're just someone wearing red. Yeah. You're just someone holding a mala. Just someone who has a picture of the Dalai Lama. You're not really practicing. So, so this is how the Rinpoche system works in Tibet. They would look for the reincarnation of their teacher, and the child would show signs of like recognizing the things they used to own, and so they just view it as a kind of changeover.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
You were talking about these 5 choices. Is that a choice to come back as a human then?
Mostly it's not a choice though, it's uncontrollable craving and karma that drives us to take rebirth.
In this transition of a lama or...
Oh, yeah, that would be their choice, yeah. A bodhisattva of a certain level has enough control over their karma to manifest in the world to benefit others. Just like the full moon can be reflected in 100 buckets of water, they manifest in countless forms, in countless ways to try and liberate others. So they might even appear as like an apple seller or a social worker, or they may not be a Rinpoche, And I personally, I'm a little dubious about them always being born men. Why is that? And only like Tibetan, right?
I suppose traditionally they would have been free of what you would say is that vortex of the obligation of bringing new life into the world as a woman.
Yeah.
Of course, nuns make that choice to have celibacy, so they're free of it too.
Yeah.
But that ability to be able to live in Tibetan culture as a full man and not have to take the responsibility of that on.
Yeah. So it's probably true they had less obstacles as men. And also, it's been said that if they were women, they would have less impact just because of the patriarchal society. But still, there's probably a lot of enlightened beings, that are around that are not men as well. Yeah. It's good to remember that. Do you have any other questions? Seize the day is all I can say.
Yeah, look, I just wanted to clarify around this point of death. At the time of death, it's only your spiritual practice that counts, that matters. And that's because it gives you then the capacity to make a more conscious choice, embrace that light in that sense of, not having anything to grasp to.
So yeah,
what do you see as the major reason for why that matters at death? Why does the spiritual practice matter at death?
Okay, so from the traditional Buddhist point of view, we are trapped in samsara. We are in this vicious wheel of existence without a choice, driven by karma. And it just gets worse if you don't make some good karma. So that is suffering. And we're driven by ignorance of not understanding the emptiness or selflessness of our, and because of self-grasping, we take rebirth because of desire and craving and ignorance. So if you can't break that cycle of rebirth, if you don't practice and get awakened, you're just going to keep going endlessly. So that is why they view death, because a lot of the veils of existence are lifted. That is a crucial moment for awakening. And from a Buddhist point of view, awakening is the whole point.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so that's why they view death as an important thing. And it is true that we invest in everything but awakening, and that's why, like, people look at monks and nuns and they're like, you're useless, you're not producing anything economically valuable, but from a Buddhist point of view is everything else is secondary and awakening is the point, so
Can you choose awakening and still be reborn in another like earthly form?
Yeah, that's
right.
The Mahayana gig is as long as space remains, as long as there are those who suffer, may I too remain to remove the darkness of the world. And like Tenzin Palmo, that nun who, it was in that book, what is it? Something, Cave in the Snow. And she's made a vow to always be reborn as a woman to show that it's possible to get awakening. And also, like the Dalai Lama said, he'll be reborn, and many of the great masters always vowed.
They've already made that commitment.
Yeah. So, yeah. And also it's based on the Jataka tales, the past lives of the Buddha. In the sutras, often he and his wife Yashodhara were born together because they loved each other so much and treated each other beautifully. And it's also true that if you are very terrible to someone, you have a karmic bond with them, and sometimes they're born as your child, or like close to you, right? So if you have someone you really don't like, be neutral. Don't just get away, but don't retaliate, because you're just building up your karmic debt,
to that person.
Yeah. Do you have any questions or comments? Are you too hot? Should we open the door?
Oh, I'm fine, thank you.
Just comfy, yeah.
I'm good now. I'm taking layers, but I'm close to the fire.
Yeah.
No, I don't have any questions. Just I've found, in the past, thinking about rebirth and what that meant, reading different writers and different teachers and hearing different people speak from different traditions, I sort of arrived at the point that it's too hard for my little brain. And the thing that I just needed to do was just to get on with the here and now and do the best I can. Let somebody else worry about, how, if I'm going to be reborn as a cockroach or a human or a bodhisattva or but it's sort of, if I spend all my time trying to sort that one out.
It's true that if you take good care of each moment of life left to you, you probably don't have to worry too much. Yeah, if you live with mindfulness and compassion, yeah.
But yes, to me it just seemed that the real point of it is, if that's a reason to live well now and do good and be compassionate and kind now, well, that's a bit of a faulty reason,
for the future.
For the future, yes. Do like if I'm just trying to live really well now, it's almost, it takes me back to my Catholic days. It sounds a little bit like Catholic indulgences.
Yeah.
And so I grew up